Y'all know what's going on. It's time for another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and welcome to the show, y'all. Look here, K-Loke and his mom, they go over to Trail's mom's house to pay their condolences. Everybody in the neighborhood is just at a loss for what happened. Trail doesn't do anything to anybody, doesn't get involved in anybody's business. This young man wanted to be a skateboarder and maybe one day go to the Olympics as a skateboarder and represent the United States. He did good in school. He played on the basketball team. He was the typical 15-year-old that wanted something other than the criminal life. His family, his parents, they made sure that he didn't gravitate in that direction. And his mom was blaming herself because she was like, I should have made him come home early. But he had stayed in this park many, many times before since it had been built, and no problems, no nothing. Everybody's wondering what happened. And then Dre sends a message to K-Loke's phone. He sends his condolences to the phone. I'm sorry about what happened to your cousin, with a black heart emoji. A black heart emoji. The symbolism in that it speaks volumes. K-Loke looks at it, and then one after the other, people from the crew that he had wanted to be a part of so bad are sending their condolences. But it's almost like a joke. It's almost like a joke. Because K-Loke is wondering if they realize that he's put the puzzle together. K-Loke is wondering why they were following him. He'd seen that Crown Vic at Dre's house. He was wondering why they were following him. Do they know that I know? Do they know that he had screenshotted and sent the information off of that burner phone to his own phone? And now he's regretting ever did it. But even he can't answer the question as to why he really did that. What was going on? He wants to make sure that he's safe and his family's safe now. But he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know what to do. And then comes a knock at the door. It's this female. She's dressed in regular clothes. She's got cornrows and all this and that. And she looks and she sees the family over there, and she says, may I see Miss Johnson? And Trail's mom, she comes to the door, and when she comes to the door, she says, my name is Detective James, and I want to extend my condolences on behalf of the police department. And she said, thank you. She said, we're going to do everything we can to find out who's responsible for this in any way, shape, or form and bring them to justice. She said, I know now is not a good time, so I'll schedule another time to come back, maybe tomorrow, to talk to you about Trail. We need to know as much as we can about him so that we can do a thorough investigation. And she stood there and she's crying, and she tells her, she said, I'll be here tomorrow, but I can't do it right now. So she understands, and she looks around over Miss Johnson's shoulder, and she sees K-Loke in there with his mom, and she looks at him and she gives him that look, and he looks back at her, and he understood that look that she gave him, and he felt bad, and he's wondering, do they know? Do they know? And in his mind, he's wondering, why did they come over here so fast? Of course they would come over there because they're investigating this case. Of course they would come to her house to let her know that they're looking into it, and they're going to make sure that everything is thoroughly looked into. But he's panicking, he's paranoid. So she leaves her card with Miss Johnson, and she tells her, if there's anything that I can ever do for you, you give me a call, day or night, it doesn't matter. And she takes the card and she goes back inside and she puts the card on the mantle. She puts the card on the mantle. And K-Loke, after some time of mingling and walking around and meeting everybody, and everybody hugging and crying and talking about how great of a guy Trail was and what kind of contribution he was going to make to the world, he eases over to the mantle and he cuffs the card and he puts it in his pocket while nobody's watching. And him and his mom, they end up leaving the house to go home. And when they get back home, they both sit there and they wonder what happened. So she has this talk with K-Lo, and she tells him, please be careful with what you're doing in the streets. Be careful who you hang around, because nobody really understands or knows why this happened and how it happened. Who would want to hurt Trail? And he sits there and guilt is washing all over him and he's feeling all kind of bad. So he goes to his bedroom and he just lays in the bed staring at the ceiling. And then he hears the familiar sound. Zzz, zzz. It's Dre calling him again. He ignores it. Then he gets a text message from Dre saying, homie, I need to see you. I know it's not a good time. Now it's not a good time, but first thing tomorrow, stop by the crib. We need to talk. I need that phone back. So K-Lo doesn't even respond. He looks at the burner phone and he opens it up again. And he looks at all of these pictures, locations, orders that he was giving to people and this, that, and that, and this. And he's trying to piece together in his mind, why would he want me to be the one to send the message? Why did he send me to this area at a certain time? And then it dawns on him and he turns the phone off immediately. He turns it off because he just realized what he had done. He had just created a record, a digital map of his location, turned that and where he was at the time that he turned that phone on and sent the messages. And he thought aloud without realizing it. I did this. I did this to my cousin. And he was afraid of what could happen to him now. He had no clue as to how do you fix something like this? How do you rectify this problem? He thought out loud. So he ends up falling asleep. And when he falls asleep, he starts to he starts to dream about his cousin Trail and all the different things that they used to talk about and what they wanted to do. And, Trail talking about wanting to go to the Olympics and do all of the great things with his life. And here's K-Lo. No dreams, no hope, no aspirations. All he wanted to do was make sure that his mom was okay. All he wanted to do was be able to pay bills on time. All he wanted to do was not have to worry about money. But he didn't sign up for this. He didn't want to be responsible for somebody's life being taken. He didn't want this. So he woke up from his dreams, sweating. Card. He pulled out the card that Detective James had given Trail's mother, and he just stared at it in the dark. And he wondered, could he, should he say anything? Could she help him? Could this change his situation? He didn't know. He didn't know, but he wondered. And he put the card back in his pocket and he fell asleep. That next morning he got up early, took a bath, all of the things that you normally do, sat down at the kitchen table with his mom and ate in silence. And she told him, and he stood up and he kissed his mom on the forehead and he told her he would. And he proceeded to leave. And he headed over to Dre's house. When he got to Dre's house, he walked in. And Dre's house had this familiar smell. It always smelled sanitized. Every year before we went back to school, we would have to go to the health department, if we, make sure we had all our shots or whatever, right? That kind of stuff. Plus back then you get some free medical attention and all that old kind of stuff, And Every time I went up there, it smelled like bleach. It was just super duper clean. And that's what Dre's house smelled like. It always smelled like bleach or pine saw. Gun oil. That kind of smell in there. It was that kind of place where you knew dangerous stuff was being talked about. And the lights were never just bright. They were always like kind of like dim, you know? And you could hear music in the back room. The guys that worked for them, they were always in the back playing John Madden and all this and that. Guns would be always everywhere over the house, just on the tables, on the mantelpiece, on the kitchen table, taped to the bottom of the kitchen table. It was a very violent environment. And when he walked in, he saw Dre sitting on the kitchen. He said, how did it go yesterday? And K-Lo looked at him. He said, I guess it went okay. He said, what was supposed to happen? And Dre looked at him. He said, what was supposed to happen, happened. And Dre and K-Lo just stood there and staring at each other for what seemed like forever. And then Dre said, where's the phone? K-Lo reached into his pocket and pulled out the phone and tossed it to him. He said, did you do what I asked you to do? Exactly how I asked you to do it? And he said, be careful, because I don't tolerate people that lie to me. And K-Lo looked at him. He said, well, I got there a little early, so I turned it on a little earlier than I needed to, but everything was fine. He said, so you sent the message on time? He was like, yeah, I sent it exactly when you told me to do. He said, what were you doing on the phone early? Did you do anything while you were on the phone? Look through it or anything like that? And K-Lo thought real hard about what he was going to say, because he didn't want to tell him that he had looked through the phone and he had screenshotted everything and sent it to his other phone. He didn't want to tell him that because he knew that would be the end of him. So he lied. And he was hoping that somehow Dre wouldn't know. And he told him, he said, nah, I just had it on early. Dre looked at him and gave him that grin. Like, you know, that kind of grin where you give somebody, yeah, like that, you know, and you show your teeth. Yeah, like that. Yeah, he gave him that grin like, yeah, okay. But at that moment, Dre knew he was lying, and K-Lo wondered if he knew he was lying. But how would he know? How would he know? He didn't realize that the phone had an app on it that would let him know what anybody would be doing on that phone. So he told him, he said, look, I tell you what. He said, we're going to have a get-together later on, and I want you to come by. You know what I'm saying? And I appreciate you, and then I'm going to throw you a little extra something for taking care of the business, but I don't have anything laying around right now. Dre knew that was a lie. I mean, K-Lo knew that was a lie. Dre had stuff all the time laying around. Money, drugs, everything. But he told him, yeah, sure. I'll come by later on, see what's happening. He said, make sure you come, you know what I'm saying, early enough to where, you know, we can, he said, make sure you come early enough so we can make sure that, you know, everything works out the way it's supposed to. So K-Lo looked at him. He said, I'll be back exactly, you know what I'm saying, at 6 o'clock. So when he got back to the car, he was driving off. And as he was driving off, he was trying to figure out what to do. What should he say? And he had taken the card that he had, you know what I'm saying, of Detective James, and put it in his shirt pocket when he left the house. So he pulled the card out and he looked at her number on the card and he decided to give her a call. Something told him that this was going to be the ticket out of this problem that he had created. And the shame and the guilt that was washing over him about his cousin being killed because of him, it was getting too much for him. So he pulled out the card and he looked at it and he dialed the number, unaware that Crown Vic was watching him from a distance. They had the binoculars on him. They saw what he was doing, but they didn't know for sure what he was doing. So one of the henchmen called Dre back and told Dre, he said, it looks like he's calling somebody. He's looking at a card. And Dre said, just stay on it. So he dialed the number, and immediately Detective James answered the phone. And she didn't waste any time. She was seasoned. She knew from the surveillance that K-Loke was at the scene, you know what I'm saying, of all of this stuff going on. She knew from the surveillance that the Crown Vic was following him. And she also knew from surveillance right now that the Crown Vic was following behind him again. So without hesitation, she said, hello? Is this K-Loke? And he paused for a second. And he said, Detective James? And she said, yes. And he said, can we talk? She said, meet me at the restaurant on Chelsea. I'll have on blue jeans and a red shirt and cornrows 6 to the back. He said, I'll be there. And she said, look, you might want to lose the Crown Vic that's falling behind you before you pull up. And he looked around and he saw the Crown Vic in the distance. And when they recognized that he saw them, they pulled off. And when he pulled off, he didn't realize that another car, another unmarked car, was following behind him. That was the feds. So they followed him all the way to the diner on Chelsea. He gets to the diner, he gets out of the car, and he goes in, and she's sitting in the booth waiting for him, menu in hand. She said, are you hungry? He's like, yeah, I'm starving. She said, order what you want. It's on the government. So he ordered him some pancakes. He loved pancakes. Blueberry. With the bacon and the eggs on the side. When they delivered the food, she started to talk to him. She said, tell me what's going on with Dre. He looked at her and he said, well, I don't know much about what he's got going on. She said, why were you in the location you were last night? What was going on last night? Because it was weird that you were there, the Crown Vic was there, because we was following the Crown Vic, and we saw you go in front of the diner, and you looked in the window, and then you fell to your knees. What happened? What's going on? He said, I saw the headline, the breaking news that my cousin had been shot. She said, I can understand that. I understand that. But she said, do you know anything about that? And he looked at her and he paused, not knowing what to say. And she said, if you know anything about that, you need to tell me now so I can help you. I'm the only one that can help you. And he looked at her and he thought for a long moment, should he say something? Should he tell her the whole truth? Should he tell her how he didn't realize what he was doing? Should he tell her anything? And he stood up, hadn't finished eating the food that she ordered, and he said, I can't. They'll kill me if I say something. She grabbed him by his hand and she said, sit down. She said, who are you talking about, Dre? And he told her, yes. I made a big mistake, and I don't know what to do. She said, let me help you. That's what you do. Tell me what happened. And if y'all want to know what happened, you're going to have to tune in to the next episode. It's been another episode of Doing Time with Joe, and I'm your host, Joe Baker, and I say peace, y'all.
I'm getting so tired.